All right, let's get into this on a Monday. Alongside me to talk about Everton and their resurgence, actually, we have the Athletics Everton writer, Paddy Boyland, and also Jacob Whitehead, and also David Ornstein as well, just to add a bit of Christmas fairy dust on top. Right, let's take this back, Patrick. Let's take this back to where Everton are, because it probably says a lot, really, that we're talking about the other Liverpool team, considering there was a massive game against Liverpool and Manchester United, and Everton are the ones who are making the headlines on a Monday. This resurgence under Sean Dyche is quite remarkable.
I think so. I mean, part of my match piece after Saturday's latest win against Burnley was just going through all the milestones they're ticking off, and the statistics get more incredible with each passing week. 10 wins in the last 14, would be 4 ahead of Chelsea without the points deduction, level with Brighton. Jordan Pickford with the most clean sheets in the league now among any goalkeeper. So those milestones are stacking up. And I think it just goes to show the job that Sean Dyche has done to stabilise Everton. Let's not forget that last season and the season before, this was a relegation-threatened squad. A lot of people would have expected similar this season, even without taking into account the points deduction. And of course, you could argue that it's a good year to have this. If you're going to get a 10 points deduction, it should happen when there's teams like Sheffield United and Burnley and Luton performing historically poorly. But you have to also give a huge amount of credit to Dyche for getting a tune out of his players, to the squad for coming out of what was a substantial blow and emerging even stronger. And I suppose as well to the fans for what they've done in helping galvanise and unite. As I think I've said a few times now, that Everton feels, as a club, feels as united as it has done for a long time. And part of that is this sense of injustice, this sense of kind of the disproportionate nature of the points deduction and the penalty imposed upon them. They've come out fighting, and I'm sure they'll continue to keep on fighting.
Yeah, do you get a sense of this sort of siege mentality, Jacob, that, the fans and players are aligned in, actually, this is a sense of injustice. We are going to fight this on the pitch, and actually, this is where we rightfully should be. That 10-point deduction, there's just too much around it for us.
I mean, historically, and Paddy will know this well, kind of defiance has always been part of the Everton identity. Some of it comes from the city and history there, and some of it also comes from it's self-styled. I mean, kind of they're known as the Dogs of War from the 80s for a good reason. That kind of gets into the defiance of it, as well as kind of a modern reason why you can unite behind that. Because this is a club who's been looking for something to unite behind for a while, and who is possibly in the last 5 to 10 years has drifted in terms of identity a little bit. It's been a spur to actually get lots of that back.
David, 12 points from their last 4 games has basically wiped out that 10-point deduction. Are you surprised by how quickly this turnaround has been?
I'm actually not. I've spent a lot of time around Everton, like Paddy, been at many of the games, and there's enough quality at that club for a start in terms of the playing staff and the personnel. They were largely, you could say, underachieving prior. We saw flashes in the past. My mind immediately thinks back to Brighton away last season when Dwight McNeil scored a hat-trick. When you look at the other teams who you would expect to be battling towards the bottom of the table this season, with all due respect to them, the likes of Sheffield United and Luton, maybe Burnley and a few others, Everton, man for man, are of a superior level. And then you look at the manager, Sean Dyche. He's been in scraps before. He's normally been successful in them and led his teams, Burnley mainly, but also Everton last season, upwards. He's brilliant at organising and, crucially, at uniting a team and galvanising. And they had a common cause. And it's really quite extraordinary that we're seeing a better Everton now than we have at any time in recent years. It's almost like they needed this in a way. And of course, they wouldn't have wanted it and feel it's unfair. But they're showing the sort of pedigree that I think they would have liked to have been showing in a way that sort of got them into this mess. Farhad Moshiri put huge money into this Everton project at the start of his ownership, in the hope that it would lead them to better times in the future, European football, bigger revenues, a more sustainable model that meant he wouldn't have to invest as much going forward, and that the books would be balanced. But they didn't deliver. Ironically, that the club has found itself punished, and now they are delivering. And hats off to them. I mean, they're the Premier League's inform, or one of the most informed teams right now. And it seems that whatever you throw at them on and off the pitch, with the fan base and the players, the staff, the executives, it seems to have given them a common cause to fight in a way that Everton fans have been waiting for many years and would have hoped it hadn't come to this before doing so.
You know, I was just thinking about, and actually before we started recording the podcast, we were talking about Dominic Calvert-Lewin and how influential a player he's been for Everton. But because he's been injured, Sean Dyche has had to figure out ways of playing this team more effectively. And, there's been so much uncertainty about how much football he can play in a season. Now, this is a masterful stroke, I think, and I sometimes don't feel Sean Dyche gets the credit he deserves in terms of tactical mobility. What do you think to that, Jacob?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is not, and both me and Paddy have written about this, this is not just a team who play kind of almost what the cliche of Burnley football was. They don't just lump it long. They are creative against Newcastle. The third goal was a 29-pass flowing move. The key to this, to Dyche's system generally, is verticality and getting the ball forward quickly. That is not inherently an ugly form of football at all. Everton have the highest direct speed of any team in the Premier League in terms of moving it towards the opponent's goal. And that leads to really, really nice transitional football often. And they have players such as Doucouré, such as McNeil, such as Jack Harrison, who really like basically turning their shoulders as early as possible. And in Calvert-Lewin, you've got the perfect striker to complement that in terms of he can both play as a hold-up player and bring others into play to go past him, but he also has the speed to stretch defences himself and create that verticality with his own legs.
I think one of the things that really occurs to me when you watch Dyche's Everton right now is that there's an identity here, a really strongly defined playing identity, which helps everything at the club. You look at the recruitment team. I mean, previous directors of football, previous heads of recruitment will have looked at Everton and the various managers, the various succession of managers over the years, and I suppose wondered, what are we recruiting for? What's the style of play? Is it a Carlo Ancelotti style, Marco Silva, Sam Allardyce, Ronald Koeman? All of these guys with distinctly different ways of playing. But you know what Dyche, in the main, the framework from which Dyche is going to work, what he wants. And I think that makes it a lot easier to pinpoint players that can come in and do a job within this system. I think kind of under the radar, but one of the most important pieces of business they did over the summer was the loan signing of Jack Harrison from Leeds. Him and McNeil are like the archetypal Dyche wingers, the wide midfielders, put a real shift in off the ball, but have those moments of quality in games, particularly from either set pieces or kind of crosses, to make a difference. Everything's geared towards getting Dominic Calvert-Lewin or Beto into the game. And then you've got the third man runs of Doucouré from midfield. And I think he's probably the most important player within the whole setup because of what he does both off the ball and on it. No midfielder, as of last weekend, has scored more non-penalty goals in the league than him since Dyche took charge. And this was a midfielder at Watford whose best football largely came as a number 8. So to see him thriving in a number 10 or split striker role is rather remarkable. I think that strikes at the heart of what Jacob is saying, in that Dyche is pigeonholed, and some of the kind of the well trotted out stereotypes are there. The reliance on set pieces, the strength from set pieces, the defensive solidity, all those kind of things. But there is much more to it than just that. I mean, watch some of what Dwight McNeil does, for example, at times where he drifts inside into the number 10 position to create. Watch some of the transitional football, some of the passing moves when the game opens up. Dyche would always tell you there's more than meets the eye to his style. But I know from very early on, people at the club were saying that as well. And one of the funnier things that I think I've written in a recent piece, somebody said to me, if if you gave him a German accent and put a baseball cap on, he's a Red Bull manager, he's a top manager in the Bundesliga, and obviously he's the short-haired ginger guy with a gruff voice from Kettering, so it's quite difficult to make those comparisons. But he's doing an amazing job. Hats off to him.
I might be jumping the gun on the script here, but is it time we reserved a bit of praise for the recruitment, because Everton have been battered? And I'm not just saying the current incumbents, although it does appear that Kevin Thelwell and his team on the sporting side, in conjunction with Sean Dyche, of course, have done outstanding work that is now sort of being seen, still relatively baby steps, but even those who have been battered in the past, who have held their positions, and when you look at the team that did away with Burnley, you know, players like Pickford and Keane, Tarkowski, and the sort of Patson at right back too, that there's a bit of a British core there, but even those that they have bought in, Premier League experience in Doucouré, a bit of a gamble in Onana, but I remember when he was signed that he was being heralded, and even Harrison, a bit of a shrewd deal from Leeds even Harrison, a bit of a shrewd deal from Leeds with their relegation, taking advantage of that, and James Garner, you know, polishing sort of gems that have maybe been discarded by the biggest clubs, say Manchester United, but Sean at Nottingham Forest, and seeing those opportunities in the market, getting Dominic Calvert-Lewin fit for any stretch of time, we know will pay dividends, because he does deliver when he's available. And even on the bench, you've got someone like Dobbin coming through from the academy, and he scored recently, and he's got the passion as well. And Beto's played a little role so far, and let's see how others, because, you know, when you've got somebody of the quality of Danjuma, who played Champions League football for Villarreal and excelled and was at Tottenham last season, not getting in the team, then you see there's some quality and some competitiveness and some depth for the first time in a long time. And what I'm also seeing, and I'm sure we'll come on to speak about this, is a bit of value in the squad for the first time in a while. Now they have sold the Gordons and the Richarlisons of this world, but perhaps they were sort of a one-off, and Everton cashed in. But there are players across the board now where you look, and if things got a little bit difficult, Branthwaite immediately springs to mind as being a great asset who Everton will hope to keep hold of, but they could, if needed, when people are talking about their financial situation, cash in quite spectacularly. That was a great piece of recruitment by the previous regime. And Onana is constantly being looked at by the biggest clubs as an option, maybe not at the very top of their list in the midfield role. And Jimmy Garner, I do think is, Gareth Southgate was at the recent Everton home game, and there were reports that immediately came out that he was looking at Dominic Calvert-Lewin and others. I've heard that he thinks very highly of James Garner, and that's actually a position that England aren't particularly blessed in. His best role is maybe that number 6, even though he's been pushed wide a little bit for Everton. So the guys have outlined really well the sort of statistical and data side and areas of play that I can't even get my head around. But I just think from a value perspective, we should give Everton a bit more credit than they've received in recent times.
I think there's two things here. One is Dyche's work improving the existing resources within the squad. So they talk about the improvement of Doucouré, giving a pathway to Jared Branthwaite. Obviously, Everton lost a couple of centre-halves in Yerry Mina and Conor Cody over the summer. And there was a bit of clamour for Mina in particular to be replaced, given how important he was at the end of last season. But Dyche and Kevin Thelwell, the director of football, they decided that they felt Branthwaite had sufficient potential to push on and to be that long-term replacement for Yerry Mina. David talks about Gareth Southgate being at Everton's games of late. I actually think that Jared Branthwaite, of all the players, is the one that has the real opportunity here, because England aren't overly blessed, overly stocked at centre-back. There's obviously a bit of debate about Harry Maguire and various others. Branthwaite seems to just have just about everything you would want from a modern-day centre-half, in that he's 6'4", he's quick across the ground, he can play out on his left foot, which is obviously an important commodity. So there's been an element of improving resources and maximising pathways. But then also, to David's other point, the recruitment has had to be done on a shoestring budget. Everton have reined in costs now over an extended period of time in an attempt to comply with FFP. Obviously, they were found in breach for 21-22, but they have reduced costs significantly. There have been lots of key outgoings. They've not been able to replace like for like. It hasn't been a case of 60 million comes in for a Richarlison, here's 60 million to spend on a replacement. As we've reported, Everton have often done their deals in a way where deals are structured over an extended period of time in instalments. Last summer, they didn't even pay. The only fee they paid, was the loan fee for Arnaud Danjuma. Everything else is deferred for another year. So effectively, bringing in a Jack Harrison, Danjuma, even though he's not played, Beto and various others, doing that on the confines of Everton's position. I think it does go to show that the work that's been done by people other than Sean Dyche at Everton as well. It's been a truly collective effort from everybody, and I think that's why they're succeeding at the moment, because there is that sense of unity, that sense of alignment across the whole club as it is.
Just to pick up on
go for it.
Just to pick up on that, I remember last January, Kevin Thelwell was under a lot of pressure because Everton hadn't spent any money in the January window. At a point where the club were really in difficulty in the league table. They kind of wanted to buy a couple of players, but when they weren't available, they resisted the urge to just go and buy for buying's sake. And now you can see that when there's a squad where the correct pathways exist, who may, as time goes on, have a little bit more money to spend by virtue of not spending last January, just kind of coming into a situation that difficult and having the patience and the long-sightedness not to panic, even though it might come with short-term pain and with a lot of pressure on him at the time, looks really, really impressive in hindsight.
Yeah, David, it's kind of making me think, actually. And, Patrick, you mentioned it earlier, all the managers that have come before. Martinez, Koeman, Allardyce, Silva, Ancelotti, Benitez, Lampard. There's a whole heap of managers. You've sort of landed on the perfect person for the situation that Everton are in Sean Dyche. Look at what he was doing at Burnley with very little money. I'd always remember every transfer window, David. When's the money coming in? Well, we haven't got any money. And guess where he got them to? It's a really interesting one, because actually when you do strip it back, this is just a clear plan from a clear guy who wants to get the best out of his players, which is kind of what Everton need, considering all the moving parts elsewhere.
There are some managers who don't like to be lavished with expensive players because, one, that has a detrimental effect on your finances, and two, it comes with huge expectations. And so, in a way, Burnley were always the underdog. They were expected to go down or struggle, but they found a style of football that suited them, their players, horses for courses. I don't think it's massively rocket science. However, many get it wrong, and they're maybe a bit too ambitious in their style of play and their recruitment, and apples and pears, and you can't sort of compare different positions, round pegs in square holes, etc. Dyche's record is beyond reproach, to be honest. You could only maybe pick him up on style of play, and maybe towards the end it was getting a little bit tenuous for the fans at Everton. I remember there was a particularly fractious post-match interview he gave at Manchester City around the lockdown period, where really he needed some investment. And I think Ben Mee spoke after the match as well and sort of echoed their sentiment. So it wasn't all singing and dancing behind the scenes at all times. But I don't think Sean Dyche needs a lot to be content. When he came into Everton last season, it was a bit of a mess. And yet he sort of seems to have hunkered down with Kevin Thelwell and Dan Purdy, a small number of people. Obviously, the board were not even coming to matches and have since sort of disintegrated. So they're pretty much running the club. And maybe that's the way Sean Dyche likes it, control of as much as he can. And those that are playing for him, he seems to have quite a defined recruitment style for a start, and takes it doesn't take a lot of working out. Very physically robust, but high level technical players. But maybe it's just not the most eye catching style of play. But it's really efficient. And if you did change his name, as Paddy says, I think he would definitely get a lot more credit. And it's one of these managers that you just don't want to play against. You know it's going to come at you in a really difficult way. And I think it's a couple of tough matches. Is it Spurs and Manchester City coming up? But they're not going to be relishing the visit of Everton or vice versa, and also the sort of the momentum and the confidence that Everton are playing with now. It's almost like the shackles are off. There's nothing to lose, but they're extremely well set up. And it's not just as simple as having a relegation specialist. You know, Sam Allardyce was at the club. It didn't work out. But maybe the right man at the right time, and Dyche with a point to prove outside of Everton. He got linked with many jobs. He was considered by the likes of Crystal Palace and Nottingham Forest, and he appeared at matches, and everybody like, oh, is Sean Dyche coming in? And fans would get angry because he has some kind of stigma and some misconceptions, in my view. But certainly Everton did feel like a decent fit. I was at his news conference after the Bournemouth game. Paddy was there too. Final day of the season, survived by the skin of their teeth. And he wasn't a happy man. You know, he knew the work that needed to be done. He knew the carnage he'd kind of walked into. But he's the sort of man that uses all the resources available to him to the maximum, the time on the training pitch, his assistants around him. Ian Woan's got a good reputation too. And it's actually a really pleasing story. And you know, Everton supporters have maybe been sold the dream of this European football and high-profile signings and glamorous managers, and you know, beneath their feet, they were sort of hemorrhaging the club's future and existence, but by great ambition, but pretty reckless decision making. And the stadium was on the way, and it's like, we're going to challenge the biggest guns in Premier League and European football. But perhaps there's just a little bit of realism now that was much needed. They're not out of the woods yet financially by any means. And we got confirmation last week that the stadium's going to open the season after next. And that just gives them a little bit more time to sort of, for the first time in years, build a thorough and proper foundation to try and create a sustainable future. It's badly needed at Everton.
Yeah, super quick, Patrick. And Jacob, please jump in as well if you've got any insight. Is that, you know, I don't think a lot of people realise just how much Sean Dyche does with players, like in terms of getting the best out of them. I was recently with Aaron Lennon, and obviously he went through his mental health battles at Burnley. And he said to me, it's like, people don't realise about Sean Dyche. Like, he'd literally just text me randomly and just be like, mate, are you okay? And you don't realise just how powerful that is when you're a player at a new team in terms of being integrated or feeling part of it. I feel like that's part of his strengths that no one really talks about, is how he connects with human beings to get the best out of them.
Yeah, I don't think that's spoken about anywhere near enough when it comes to Sean Dyche. Again, going back to what people perceive him to be versus the reality. And I know from doing a piece on the recent turnaround in fortunes on the pitch, quite a lot of what people were saying from inside the club was that he really does put an arm around the shoulder of players, and there was a perception of him at times, particularly over the handling of Patrick Bamford when he came in on loan at Burnley, that he was quite a tough manager to work under, and he is very demanding of his players, and maybe he's looked at that issue with Patrick Bamford and maybe moved on in his own style. But there's an awful lot of innovative stuff here. I mean, I went away with the squad on their pre-season tour of Evian in France, and they had a psychologist on site that Dyche has used from his time at Burnley, a guy called Simon Clarkson, and he was doing sessions with players in the evening. So they would do double sessions out in searing heat in the middle of the French-Swiss Alps during the day, and then they'd go and do something like that, or there would be a team bonding exercise. As I understand, he encourages players to be pretty open about their lives in general. It's not just how are you feeling on a football pitch, but it's, well, is there anything going on I need to know about? Do you want to speak to me about it? Do you want to speak to your players about it? They're encouraged to be together. And one of the most striking things from recent weeks has been that they have had injuries and they have needed fringe players, as you might call them, to step in and step up. And when those players have made an impact, it's quite clear that there's a camaraderie here, that the rest of the teammates are delighted for them. Lewis Dobbin, who we mentioned earlier, a youngster from the academy, he scored his first Premier League goal against Chelsea after coming on as a sub. if you watch the celebration back, every single outfield teammate goes up to him to celebrate with him. And maybe that's a small thing, but the message that's come back throughout is that the camaraderie has grown. Dyche has fostered that sense of spirit. And part of what you're seeing now on the pitch is a group of players that are just really working hard for each other and putting that graft in. So I do think it's right. I think there's an awful lot more that goes on behind the scenes with Dyche than people give him credit for.
We talk about kind of all these tactical, complex tactical things even. And at the heart of Everton at the moment, lots of it is you want to get Dominic Calvert-Lewin fit, firing, and that's something managers haven't been able to do for a couple of years. And Calvert-Lewin's spoken about the kind of difficulties that's had on him mentally, not quite being able to get himself quite right, getting back and having a new issue crop up. And Dyche has been very good at, while lots of other coaches might have been, let's get him back, let's get him playing. At the start of the season, he was very, very careful about reintegrating Calvert-Lewin, about giving him support, but really about genuinely putting players' welfare first. It's talked about as a bit of thing, but this, I think, was a real example of it in action. And now he's back in form. I think, although the goals haven't necessarily come, the underlying statistics are right up there with the best of Calvert-Lewin's career. And it's just, I think, just one example, along with the Delhi situation, of just how impressive Dyche has been.
I was going to mention Delhi because it's been quite interesting to see the work that's gone into improving Delhi, getting him back to a position where he's able to kind of reintegrate with the squad. He's now back in training with players. But Dyche spoke of a conversation he'd had with Delhi and the rest of the squad where they were addressing the issue of direct football. And he said that Delhi had effectively been the one to explain it to the rest of the squad. And he said it's not direct football in the sense of banging long balls up to a target man for 90 minutes. But Delhi had compared it to his time with Pochettino at Tottenham, where direct football was a proxy for play forward, play aggressively, break the lines with your passes, whether it be in the air or on the ground. And Delhi had almost taken on a role of teacher as a mentor within the Everton squad, explaining some of these principles on behalf of Dyche. So there is that element there, and I do think you go back to Aaron Lennon. You talk about Delhi's mental health. I've mentioned Simon Clarkson coming in as a psychologist, and I think Dyche's mantra is, and his sense is that if you tap into what makes players tick off the pitch, and you make sure that the kind of well-being is taken care of, then you're going to get better performances when they set foot on the field. And you're seeing that with Calvert-Lewin. Hopefully we will see that with Delhi, and that kind of redemption arc continues.
Fantastic. All right, let's quickly move this on to, where Everton are at. Obviously, the 10-point deduction. They were punished, profitability and sustainability is definitely something on everyone's lips across the Premier League. But is there any more punishment open to Everton, David, or is the matter closed?
Yeah, there is the potential for legal action by the teams who may have suffered as a result of the breach Everton were found to have committed. So you're talking about the likes of Leicester City, Leeds United, Burnley. And let's see, there was a deadline of 28 days after the news of Everton's punishment for those teams to claim. I don't know if that's still the case or whether it gets extended, whether the clubs have been speaking. We don't have any sort of update on that, but we'll have to wait and see. In terms of the breach itself, Everton's appeal has gone in, and so let's see if they get it reduced in any way, which will be their aim. They'd like to get it wiped out. They're doing a good job of wiping it out regardless. But we say that and we laugh, but it's not a laughing matter to them because points mean money. And prestige and European qualification, so that they feel they should be up there and benefiting from the higher position without this points deduction. Let's see how that plays out. In terms of going forward, they're FFP compliant to our understanding for the next round of PSR, which is what it's called now. And so certainly on the football side, because they've cut their cloth accordingly, Paddy talks of how many of the deals they've done have been sort of backloaded, so the payment will come later. And that's credit to Kevin Thelwell and the sporting team who have negotiated those deals. that means in January, whatever manoeuvrability they have, I do think it will be very limited again. Maybe look for some loans or extremely low cost deals or back-ended deals again. But the noises that we're getting that they are compliant going forward will fill the fan base with encouragement at what's been a really difficult time. There have been reports of potential administration. We don't know that to be the case at all. It's not been mentioned in the conversations that we've had with our contacts. Of course, there's like doomsday scenarios for all clubs, and Everton are in a really sticky situation. But I think a bit of reassurance to the supporters is that, hopefully for their sake, Everton are sort of through the worst of it now, and they can actually build forward. There is the big issue of the proposed takeover by 777. We still have no clarity on whether they are to be approved by the Premier League, the FA, the Financial Conduct Authority. Again, a lot of reporting and speculation around potential rejection of that under the owners and directors tests or problems. But all we know is that Everton and 777 remain confident that it's on track and that they are going to get this through. That said, it's not their decision. And so that is a huge moment on the horizon, because if it's not 777 who are investing significant money into the club, I mean, Paddy's reported it's around £100 million now in loans, unsecured loans that's gone into the club. That shows that Everton are having problems generating their own money to run the club. But they will be sort of optimistic that they're in an okay state and that they will improve going forward.
I think one of the ironies, going back to the points deduction, was that this is called Premier League's profitability and sustainability rules. It was brought in an attempt to make sure that clubs ran themselves sustainably, made the right sorts of decisions. But Everton's punishment is in essence a double punishment. You have a points deduction, but what does that mean in terms of Premier League prize money? I mean, well, I think from this year moving forward, it's worth about 3 million a place. The difference between Everton finishing, say, 10th or 16th is close to £20 million in prize money. Is somebody going to be knocking at Everton's door in 20 for the 23-24 accounts, which will be published in future years, and saying, well, you're 20 million short here? It is both a points deduction and also a fine by virtue of the lost revenue. So that strikes me as ironic, given that we're talking about profitability and sustainability here. I think David Cole's right to mention that Everton aren't out of the woods financially in any sense. That they need a takeover to go through, whether it's 777 or somebody else, because Farhad Moshiri is no longer able or willing to fund the club's losses, and they do run at a loss every year as it stands. I don't think we're expecting any clarity now on 777. It'd be a surprise if there was any clarity before the end of this year. So that will drag on into the new year, we expect. And that's going to be very important, because how do you, when you're planning for a January transfer window, how do you deal with this sense of uncertainty? You can't make any big, extravagant purchases, even if the money is there, and it isn't in Everton's case. So I think the sooner that comes, the better, because it allows other people at the club to respond and I suppose adapt accordingly. Maybe this just goes to show, kind of with all the off-field issues we've spoken about, again, goes to show what a great job the current incumbents at the club are doing right now. The footballing staff in particular are kind of blanking out all the noise, as Sean Dyche so often puts it, and getting the team on the pitch to a position where they're able to compete as well as they have done. That seems to me to be the big triumph here for Everton, that with all this nonsense going on elsewhere, financially and otherwise, the team is almost thriving.
Yeah, you finished it perfectly for me. That's a good way to end the pod today. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time, Paddy, Jacob and David as well. And please remember to rate and review this podcast if you are enjoying it. Thanks for listening. We're back tomorrow.
If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.